What is going on, everyone? Welcome back to the Laugh to Learn podcast, your weekly source for a fun spin on all the news you need to know about. My name is, of course, Jacob Paveo, as it remains. And I come to you from the Great White North, doing this without a script in front of me. It's the first time in a very long time I've done so, but let's hope I can remember everything that I need to say. If it's your first time here, thank you so much for tuning in. Welcome to the show. We have a dandy this week. It's going to be a good one. If it's a return here, thank you very much for coming back. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Share the podcast with your friends and family. You can take a screenshot of it playing on your phone or on your laptop if that's where you happen to listen, and share it over in your stories, your fleets, your reels, all those fun places that you can share small photo and video things. This week, it's actually a pretty decently meaty, a juicy episode, because there are two significant political things happening right now. Here in Canada is one, and here in Ontario the other. The first thing we're going to talk about is Bill C-10, which affects me as a podcaster potentially. The second thing we're going to talk about is the Ontario government passing a law with a Notwithstanding Clause, which is so crazy, so much that we need to get into, so much to talk about. I hope you guys are doing well. Once again, thank you for tuning in. You know where you are. This is the Laugh to Learn podcast. Hey, check it out! It's the Laugh to Learn podcast! Bill C-10. What is it? What is happening right now? How does it impact all of us? Well, I am going to start with an updated article from the National Post. This is written by Anya Karadiglia, and it is titled, Bill C-10 hits speed bump as Speaker voids dozens of secret amendments. So, the Liberal government's push, quote, the Liberal government's push to speed controversial broadcasting Bill C-10 through Parliament hit a road bump Tuesday when the Speaker of the House voided dozens of amendments to the bill. The Heritage Committee voted on these amendments last week without debate or the ability to consult experts. The unusual process in which the public wasn't aware of what MPs were voting on until days later was criticized as being, quote, secret lawmaking, end quote, by the University of Ottawa professor Michael Geist. The amendments were made public Monday when the amended bill was tabled in the House of Commons. Conservative MP Blake Richards asked the Speaker of the House to strike those amendments, arguing the committee exceeded its authority, and on Tuesday, the Speaker agreed. Speaker Anthony Rota declared dozens of amendments added at committee after debate time ran out null and void, and ordered the bill to be reprinted without them. Quote, in some ways, it's indicative of, frankly, how the Liberals have handled this bill almost from the get-go. You've had a minister unable to effectively communicate the contents of it. You've had a provision pulled back, which clearly has sparked enormous amount of concern across the country, Geist said Tuesday. He continued, and now in the rush to try and get this legislation through without any real debate, and it oversteps the very boundaries of committee. And especially for this government, which came to power arguing that it was going to give more power to committees and leave them more independent. To see them rebuked in this way by their own speaker is, I think, quite telling, end quote. And again, that is from a professor at the University of Ottawa. The committee had been limited to 5 hours of debate by a Liberal and Bloc-supported motion in the House of Commons in an attempt by those parties to ensure the bill passes through the House of Commons before summer break. It is a rarely used move, marking the first time in 20 years that the House limited debate time at committee. The two parties opted for the move after clause-by-clause amendment process at the committee took longer than expected due to concerns about the bill's impact on free expression. Those worries emerged after government amendments removed an exemption for user-generated content, putting social media platforms under the authority of the CRTC through the CRTC's powers, or rather, though the CRTC's powers were later limited in another government amendment. Rota said Tuesday his decision had to be made with very little precedent to go on. Rota is, of course, the Speaker of the House. The rare move to limit debate at committee launched a whole sequence of events, said former MP Derek Lee, who served in Parliament for 23 years. So, I'm going to stop reading there and get into exactly what's going on. We're gonna go through this and break it on down for you. So, the key elements of this story are, of course, that the Liberal and Bloc parties decided to work together because they really want this bill passed through. And they want it passed through before the summer break. Now, the really interesting thing about this is instead of requiring politicians to stay all night and debate, which is an option, although basically people can refuse, which seems like that's what was going to happen, they instead decided to limit the allowed time for debate on this bill. So basically the bill was read, they were debating, they were limited to 5 hours, and after 5 hours, that was it. And then the following sitting of the House, they were going to vote on the bill. Well, what they decided to do was, after the 5 hours of debate, they decided to add dozens of more amendments to the bill, increasing the authority of the CRTC, which is, of course, the Canadian Radio, Television, and Telecommunications Committee. And I only know that because of school. So essentially, how does this impact you and I? Because it's obviously weird, right? Politicians are trying to pass things through in the middle of the night. They got caught. Well, what exactly were they trying to pass through? Well, this expansion of the CRTC's power would be given to user-generated content. So right now, the CRTC, when it comes to entertainment, really the only things they have control over are television, cell phone tower use, so like data use and stuff like that, and of course radios, which is where it all started. So they have essentially no power on the internet, essentially none. The only place that they do have power, and it's not necessarily through the CRTC, although they do have some, is through pornography. It's the only realm of the internet that they really have any legal jurisdiction. So this was aimed at user-generated content. Now, on its basis, it was certainly aimed towards fighting against what the Liberals and the Bloc are calling Russian propaganda. And there's almost no doubt that there's a significant amount of Russian propaganda impacting us here in Canada, impacting our elections, and this was the way they wanted to go about doing it, was increasing the CRTC's power. So rather than finding a way to educate high school students on how to validate what they see on the internet, they decided that the government should be able to control what they see on the internet, which would mean that if in a majority government situation, when the CRTC is staffed by that majority government, it's possible to completely control everything seen on the internet in a Chinese-like fashion. It extremely limits free speech. Now, how does that impact me? Well, it actually impacts a number of especially smaller podcasters significantly, because one of the amendments was to give the CRTC the authority to essentially overstep. And if you were to search for my podcast by any way other than name itself, it would be hidden. And even in some cases, if you knew the name of the podcast, you wouldn't be able to access it in Canada if it was deemed to be speech inappropriate for the masses. That's my own terminology. Now, that is unacceptable, because that means that for some reason there's a significant, because you can't just look at the politicians, right? This isn't the fault of the politicians. It's the fault of the electorate. And it's really, really odd to me as a longtime Liberal voter to see that Liberals are now afraid of freedom of speech and expression. Because let's not forget the political persuasion that pushed forward, the freedom of speech and expression in the LGBTQ community, the advocacy of black rights and civil liberties, even in more modern times, the transgender community, right? That's all been pushed by left-leaning individuals. Now, in Canada, conservatives and those on the right were much quicker to come to terms than in pretty much the rest of the world, which is fantastic, but that was driven by liberal thought. Well, now it seems that they've found reasons to fear opinion. So, and fear is the only word that I can really use to describe it, and it confuses me because I don't understand being afraid of an opinion, because I think the opinions they're afraid of can be torn down really easily. So, first of all, they're hiding behind the concept of Russian propaganda on social media and whatnot. And you know what? I think, yeah, for sure, people get lied to on social media, but people have to figure that out. That you can't trust what you're seeing on social media and on TikTok and whatnot. And I don't think it's the government's job to step in. And if they believe it, however they were persuaded to believe it, I think that you can't challenge someone's beliefs. It's the reason why, like, a lot of people say that Trump, the only reason he won was Russian propaganda. Fine. But even if that's true, they believed the propaganda. So either you uneducated your citizens to a point that they were stupid enough to believe complete falsehoods, in which case that's your fault, or that Russian propaganda was based in truth, and some of your citizens bought into it and they agreed with it. And once they agree with it, it's no longer a Russian propaganda, right? It is an American truth. Like in the idea of a Trump supporter, right? And that's kind of how I view this as well. But further to that is challenges against minority communities, because it is already defined as hate speech in Canada to attack someone because of their religion or their skin color on the internet, right? It's illegal to do so. And I am completely fine with that legislation. But one thing that could happen is someone like a Sam Harris, who, from an educated perspective, targets problems he sees within the doctrine of Islam. Now, that is, by definition, it's not hate speech. He's allowed to speak in Canada. It has been reviewed, right? And it's completely allowed, and actually, it's not even controversial in Canada. Even the likes of Ben Shapiro speaking in Canada, like the controversy isn't as significant as it is in the U.S. because our citizens seem to be much more okay with the idea of an educated discussion on these difficult topics. However, our government is not. And that's quite clear with the current Liberal government, as well as leaders in the bloc, that those sorts of discussions have been declared racist by leaders in the party, which they're simply not. And if you think that they are, you really need to spend time listening to them, because the things that are going to be targeted by this bill are not things like Russian propaganda, because first of all, I don't think it's as prevalent here as people like to say it is, and it's very difficult to point at and be like, yeah, that's Russian propaganda, because it just looks like someone who's mad at Trudeau or mad at Ford or mad at whoever, right? So how do you figure out if it started in Russia or not? What if it's just a Canadian citizen who's upset? And they have to have the right to be upset. I have to have the right to be able to have a podcast where I say whatever I want, shy of directly breaking the law by uttering threats or delivering hate speech, which is a very high bar, even in Canada, to reach. It's actually very, very rare that anyone is ever charged with those similar offenses because of how high the bar is. The standard is so high that you have to break to be charged with such a thing. So it's really, really important to note that it appears like Bill C-10 attempted to lower that bar and to allow the CRTC to get directly involved in user-generated content, which means a video you post on TikTok, the CRTC would have the right to take down. Actually, that's not true. They wouldn't have the right to take it down. They would have the right to block all other Canadian citizens from seeing it within Canada. That's a scary thought. That's a scary thought, right? My small podcast could disappear off the face of the earth if some sort of cultural status was broken by me on an episode. Suddenly it wouldn't be accessible within Canada, and there's nothing anyone could do about it. It would just be deemed essentially not okay for Canadian ears. And quite frankly, I think that the government has no business deciding what is or is not okay with Canadian ears. So I will keep talking about this as this bill moves forward. They are making a bunch of changes. It hasn't yet been voted on, but there is a vote upcoming. So in the next few weeks before the summer session, we will do another dive into Bill C-10. Hopefully it doesn't have any significantly negative impacts on our lives. But again, I will keep you abreast of the situation because I like that word. The second topic today is, believe it or not, somewhat more impactful than the first. And the real reason for that is because it's involving our Ontario provincial government legally breaking the law. And I absolutely am not joking when I say that. So this news story comes from the Canadian Press, published by the CBC, and it is not given an author, but it's titled Ford Government Pushes Through Controversial Election Spending Bill with Notwithstanding Clause. What is the Notwithstanding Clause? Stay tuned to find out. So the clause allows legislatures to override portions of the Charter of Human Rights and Freedoms for a 5-year term. Quote, the government of Premier Doug Ford has pushed a controversial bill through the Ontario legislature limiting third-party election advertising by employing a rarely used legislative power. Bill 307, which used the Notwithstanding Clause to reintroduce parts of a law struck down by a judge last week, passed Monday by a margin of 63 votes to 47. The clause allows legislatures to override portions of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms for a 5-year term before being put to another vote. A judge found it was unconstitutional for the government to double the restricted pre-election spending period for a third-party advertisement from 6 months to 12 months before an election call. The Progressive Conservative government argued the extended restriction was necessary to protect elections from outside influence. The bill passed Monday afternoon after a marathon weekend debate in which oppositions argued the government was trying to silence criticism ahead of next June's provincial elections. Scrolling further down in the article, it continues, unions had argued the limit infringed on their rights to free speech, but the Attorney General argued the changes were necessary to protect elections from outside influence. The government reintroduced the bill with the override clause last week and held the marathon debate over the weekend. Government House Leader Paul Calandra repeated the Attorney General's arguments on Monday, saying the amendments were necessary to protect the elections, saying, quote, the opposition want a system where there are no rules. We insist that elections be done fairly, end quote. He has also argued that it was necessary to recall legislators from their summer break to attend to the matter because Morgan's judgment voided all limits on pre-election spending ahead of the upcoming June 2nd, 2022 vote. Now, this is an interesting story because 99 out of 100 times, the Conservatives enjoy money in politics, and the Liberals do not enjoy money in politics. But there is one sector where Liberals actually benefit. They get more funding than Conservatives. At least here in Canada. I don't know if it's true for the U.S., though I would assume it is, but I haven't actually looked into it. And that is labor unions. Unions give a lot of money to left-wing parties, specifically the NDP, which is widely regarded as a union party. But the Liberal Party and the Bloc and the Green Party as well all benefit from significant donations from unions. Now, on the flip side, the Conservative Party and other smaller conservative parties, I don't like using the word right-wing because people think that means like extreme, but parties to the right of center all typically benefit far more from corporate donations as opposed to union donations. Now, if you've been following a whole lot that's been coming from Doug Ford, you will know that unions really do not like him. They really, really do not like him, almost to a historical level. Like almost, and it's actually, that was incorrect English, an historic level. And so currently, under law, unions, actually not currently because the law just changed, but before the change, unions and any other corporate structure were allowed to donate. The spending limit for a 6-month period leading up to an election was $600,000. But beyond the 6 months, you could spend whatever you want on ads and such. There was no spending limit. So this isn't party donations. This is separate political advertising. So a union, at this point in time, there's no election in the next 6 months. They can spend trillions of dollars if they want on political ads. It's just that statistically, it's in the last 3 months that ads are really effective. So under law, we had it at a spending limit of $600,000 over 6 months. Now, using the Notwithstanding Clause, the Ford government has pushed through a spending limit of $600,000 over 12 months. And the next election is June 22nd of next year, meaning starting next week on June 22nd of this year, there will be a spending limit of $600,000 for a full year by labor unions and anyone, but specifically targeted towards labor unions, for political campaigns. Now, or rather political campaign spending. Now, this also, of course, limits Ford's donors. The difference is there are far more corporate donations and corporations, period, than there are unions, right? So, as a whole, the Conservative Party has always received far more donations. They're also one party, right? They're not really splitting the right-wing vote, whereas on the left, there are two significant parties, and then the smaller Green Party here in Ontario. Spending is already split, and there are fewer unions to donate. So, the really, really fascinating thing about this, though, is we're actually seeing Liberals fighting for an increase, essentially, in campaign ads and campaign ad spending, whereas the Conservatives are fighting to cut it, which is a really odd situation to be in. Now, the big story here is the Notwithstanding Clause, which, as I alluded to at the beginning, allows the government to pass a law that has been deemed illegal by the courts. So a judge reviewed and deemed that it is against the law for this amendment to be placed, stating that it is more than suffice for a 6-month period to be acceptable to limit political donations. Essentially, the Notwithstanding Clause allows the government to say that we don't care what that judge said. So, here is the new law, notwithstanding another vote in 5 years. Now, the biggest problem here is that the Ford government had every right to begin an appeals process here. They had every right to appeal that judge's decision to who is a Superior Court judge. They could have appealed this to the Supreme Court of Canada, who would have absolutely reviewed it and probably come to a decision within a matter of weeks, because they are sitting right now until the end of June. And they would have definitely looked at this. So instead, what we're left with is a jump to a conclusion by the Conservative government stating that, and this is a way of stating, I should say, that our courts are overstepping and wrong in this decision. The real issue, though, is that the judge is not a party to any political persuasion, right? He's not a member of any political party. They're, our Superior Court justices are not elected, and it really is an abuse of legislative power. Now, that's being said by someone who absolutely agrees with this rule. I absolutely agree with it. I'm a liberal, and I hate spending, any sort of spending from corporations in politics. I think it doesn't make sense. Why are corporations funding our political campaigns? Seems like something we should probably be doing. And if people don't care enough in a candidate to donate personally, then that candidate gets no money. And that's the way that it should be. But that being said, I also have to disagree with the Conservative Party's decision to push this through, notwithstanding, because they're going directly against a judge without even filing an appeal. So they're not going through the full legal process. And the judge's decision is quite rational. He essentially said that reading all of the evidence and using the professional witness, the witness testimony that was provided by the Ontario government, provided by Doug Ford's government, he came to the conclusion, by what they said in court, that 6 months is sufficient to limit spending on political campaigns without basically taking away from the rights of average citizens. That 6 months, $600,000 is a good limit, and there's no reason right now to overturn it. Now, of course, as alluded to, Doug Ford is fearing a significant onslaught of funding headed towards him, or rather against him, right? There's going to be a ton of political campaigns against him. The unions really want him out. So we are going to see where this leads, but for now it seems at least that this law is passed through. It's going to be on the books for 5 years. There's nothing we can do to change that now. And we are going to see next June if this decision was good or bad by Doug Ford, because you can rest assured that you're going to be hearing about this. And just so I want to make it so clear what the Notwithstanding Clause means, that a judge told the Conservative Party this is illegal, this is against the Canadian Charter of Human Rights and Freedoms, and the Conservative Party said, too bad. Thank you all so much for listening and tuning in once again this week. If you have yet to do so, hit that subscribe button wherever you happen to be listening. And, of course, take these conversations with your friends and family out into the real world. Perhaps even check out the full-length articles that were discussed here. And, yeah, I hope you guys are staying safe, getting vaccinated, and we're all able to soon move on with our lives from this crazy COVID crisis. So until then, keep washing your hands, keep wearing those masks, keep taking in those needles, keep on laughing, and keep on learning.